welcome everyone to the July 2024 Heat Dome edition of the Idaho Department of Labor's Labor Market Insight Series. My name is Craig Shull, and I'm the Labor Market Information Research Supervisor here at the department and your host for the webinar, although Ryan's going to be doing most of that work today. So anyway, just as a quick update, our most recent unemployment rate figure that we reported a little earlier was for May's at 3.3%. That's the 8th straight month it has been at 3.3. Our next release will be next week on July 19th, and we'll be revealing the estimates for June. Today, Ryan Whitesides, our labor economist covering the state's eastern region from our Idaho Falls office, will be steering a conversation around the recreation of Idaho's fish and game, one of the top attributes of this state's quality of life. And joining Ryan today is our labor economist who's covering Idaho's North Central, Lisa Grigg, who is in our Lewiston office. And we have a special guest today. His name is Ian Malapai. He's the marketing director for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. He's been with the agency since July 2018 and focusing on communicating and sorry to butcher that, communicating the work his agency performs on behalf of the public and ensuring the next generation of outdoor enthusiasts through the recruitment, retention, and reactivation of hunters and anglers. Ian's a Boise resident and holds a bachelor's degree from Brown University, and in his free time enjoys refereeing football and exploring Idaho's vast outdoor recreational opportunities with his wife and 2 daughters. Ian, welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan and excited to hear what you have to say today, Ryan. Go ahead.
Thank you, Craig. So we at the Idaho Department of Labor have had a unique opportunity to collaborate a little bit with Idaho Fish and Game on information sharing both today and in preparation for this webinar. It's a multifaceted industry. There's recreation involved. There's the fish and game aspect. And the fish and game elements of the industry, it's interesting to think that Idaho's history in fish and game has gone back hundreds, if not thousands of years with those who've dwelt here. We'll have a lot of panel insights from Ian, who is an industry expert from Idaho Fish and Game. And we think this material will be very interesting and hopefully thought-provoking for you as we proceed here. Ian, how's your year been so far out on both the waterways and out on the land with Idaho Fish and Game, both from your own experience and with your family?
Yeah, it's been a great year from my personal experience. I like to call it resource reconnaissance. So I've been out there making sure I've been testing the turkey populations this spring and definitely exercising quite a few fish this summer. So it's been great personally. And then from an agency standpoint, things are looking great. We exist to manage and conserve Idaho's wildlife on behalf of the public, and all that is going well. So excited to be here today and appreciate you guys inviting me on. Thank you again for joining us. We will enjoy your expertise and what you have to say. There's going to be 3 sections of the webinar today. Idaho as a wildlife recreation destination is the first section that Lisa will cover. And then next we'll cover wildlife recreation labor market information. And then briefly at the end, we'll talk about some strengths and challenges. And how are you doing, Lisa? Thank you for joining us.
I'm good, thanks. Thank you for having me.
First of all, we'll have the presentation or the privilege of hearing from you on the presentation. And thank you for your research and analytics on this.
Well, I live, as you heard, I'm from North Central, so based in Lewiston. So I am really kind of in the heart of a lot of the salmon steelhead of Idaho. It's as Ryan said, it's been here for generations with the Nez Perce. It was very much part of their culture. And so if you want to go into the next slide, I'm just going to kind of set the stage a little bit of what makes Idaho so unique when it comes to wildlife and recreation opportunities. And I think this will really help explain a little bit of why Idaho is such a gem in this area. So first off, we're a fairly large state with a low human population. We have just under 2 million people. By density, we have about 23 people per square mile. This places us with one of 9 states in the US that have under 30 people per square mile. I do want to mention that 3 of our border states share this as well. So we've got Montana, Wyoming, and Nevada. So 4 of those 9 states in the US are our neighboring states. We have significant elevation differences. Here in Lewiston, we're actually at the lowest elevation point in Idaho at about 700 feet, but you get over 12,000 and then you have a mean elevation of about 5,000 feet. I actually read something this week that if you were to stretch Idaho out flat, it would be bigger than Texas because we have so many mountains. We have 150 mountain ranges or so, by the way. Another thing I want to mention that's very important is that we are one of 5 states that has more than half of our land that is federally managed. When you combine state ownership in there, well, state management in there, it's 70% or so of Idaho's land area, federal and state. And that actually is, as we're going to talk about later, is part of what makes some of the opportunities in Idaho so phenomenal. We also are 41% forested. And then when you think about ag land, we're about 22% ag land. So those two together make up about 2/3 of Idaho's land area. Speaking of water, we have lots of water. We have over 100,000 river miles. We have almost 1,000 river miles that are designated scenic on our 22 rivers. As a comparison, Montana has about 3 rivers that are designated wild and scenic. We also have snowmelt fed streams. So this provides for salmon, they like cold water. So when you have really hot water, they don't thrive so well. So another reason why Dvorak, the #1 global steelhead hatchery, is located in my region is likely because of the cold waters that come from our mountain streams. I also do want to mention Hell's Canyon. Hell's Canyon borders Idaho and Oregon. It's essentially the state line between the two. It is the deepest river gorge in North America. It has about almost an 8,000 foot elevation gain. Compare that to Grand Canyon, which is about a 6,000 foot elevation gain. We are much shorter than the Grand Canyon, but deeper. And then again, when you look at just the species that we have, Idaho Fish and Game says there's almost 10,000 species of plants and animals that essentially you can locate and identify throughout Idaho. And not only just such diversity, but we have some really amazing wildlife that you can't see too many other places. Moose, caribou, grizzly bear, lynx. We have a large elk population actually as well. And then when we take to the birding side, we have lots of eagles, both golden eagles, bald eagles. And then if you go into southeastern Idaho and Gray's Lake, which is one of the national wildlife refuges, you can find one of the most dense sandhill crane breeding grounds in North America. And so it's really, the sky's the limit, I think. And Ian, here's a question for you. So if someone is kind of a beginner in outdoor recreation, how would they get started in something so vast as Idaho? What are some options that could maybe get them out there recreating?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you just highlighted is super special, because what makes Idaho unique, as with other Western states, is just the availability and access to the outdoors. You know, when you're talking about the amount of federally managed land, often that's referred to as public land. And we have research study after research study of, you know, what gets people outdoors, what is the biggest impediment, and it's the #1 answer every time is where to go, having places to go. And the fact that, you know, 3/4 of our state is available to be accessible by the public is huge. And we've removed the largest barrier just to begin with. You know, so really just going anywhere outdoors, just 10 minutes probably from every city, town in Idaho, you can be outside and observing nature, if not in the middle of your town. And I think that is the easiest way to get out and experience it. There's lots of resources from a hunting and fishing perspective. Really, I just say go to your local outdoor shop, pick up a fishing rod, and get a little advice and go out. Our rivers are teeming with fish. And if you're interested in hunting, taking the hunter education class is mandatory, but it's also a way to learn a great way to learn the skills to hunt safely and ethically.
Let's just quickly talk before we switch slides here, Ryan, on wilderness areas. So Idaho has 12 wilderness areas, including Frank Church, which is one of the largest wilderness areas in the continental US. how do you access the wilderness area? Because motorized vehicles aren't allowed, right? So how do you access Idaho's wilderness areas to participate in all this recreation?
Yeah, there's a number of access points. Like you said, motorized vehicles are not allowed, and so hiking is typically the best way to get in there. There's a number of actually land airstrips that you can access areas that are outside of the wilderness or nearby. Horsebacks are allowed, and that's, you know, and then there's obviously, like you said, there's wild and scenic rivers where you can float. And you know, Idaho is home to some fantastic rafting companies because of that opportunity. So whether you want to walk, hike, horseback ride in, you're going to see opportunity. You know, you're going to see Idaho as it was 200 years ago, which is super unique opportunity that we have within the state.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, Ryan, next slide. Okay. So just before I show you the map of Idaho and show you kind of how some of this lines up, I just want to really highlight the vast ecological diversity we have of our geology. So we have coniferous forest and mountain lakes, but then we also have semi-arid desert. And we have Lewiston here with an inland seaport. Our waters actually go to the ocean. It's the only place in Idaho that happens, but it is so diverse. And Ian, what does this do for wildlife habitats? How does that create opportunities for wildlife and just the diversity we have here?
Yeah, really having these ecosystems provides different habitat for different types of animals. And it provides seasonal habitat for these animals. So, you know, we have probably the largest diversity of big game, bird, and fish species in the Western states. There's not many states that actually have, you know, elk, bighorn sheep, mountain goat, deer, white-tailed deer, mule deer, moose. And then on the fishing side, you know, we have everything from the warm water species of fantastic bass fishing up north and across the state. We have wild salmon and steelhead. And so, you know, we've got the sagebrush where we have sage grouse and sharp-tailed grouse and you know, pygmy rabbits, cotton-tailed rabbits, jackrabbits. It really just allows for habitat for a very diverse group of animals to live across the state and for people to enjoy, whether they're out hiking and birding and just wildlife watching or participating in more active, you know, sports like hunting and fishing.
Perfect. All right, next slide, Ryan. So there's been, on a survey by Idaho Commerce, they said that visiting the outdoors was one of the top 3 reasons why people come to Idaho. So out-of-state residents come visit Idaho. About 86% of Idaho's tourism dollars comes from out-of-state residents. And so my question is to you is, there's some really great opportunities, but it's also potentially very competitive to actually do some of this recreation as an out-of-state resident within Idaho, right?
There's a ton of opportunity. We recognize, and I actually had the unique opportunity. I actually worked at Idaho Commerce as well, so I have sort of that economic development and tourism perspective. But yeah, I mean, tourism is a huge driver for Idaho, and especially our rural communities. And you know, I just know when people come to Idaho, they get to enjoy some of the towns and the cities, but they also have a component where they're going outdoors and experiencing nature. And that is a huge selling point for our state. And with that comes, you know, some challenges as well, is because this is so great. People want to come, and as Idaho residents, we get to enjoy that opportunity. You know, we get to live people's vacations every weekend. But there are times when people want to come to Idaho and experience that as well. And you know, what we saw in 2020, there was a huge increase in outdoor recreation. And Idaho was one of the few states that still kept outdoor recreation open and available to our citizens. And it brought a lot of people who hadn't traditionally spent a lot of time outdoors into the outdoors. And so, you know, as more people come into the outdoors, it changes the historical experience that people have become accustomed to. And that change can be difficult. And so we've worked very closely with the Department of Parks and Recreation, with Idaho Tourism, and had a campaign that went on for 4 years about recreating responsibly and, just managing not only the interactions with people in the outdoors as far as dealing with wildlife, safety, but also just managing the communities and making sure that the communities were left just as beautiful and pristine and whole as they were before people came, and things like littering. So, that's something with the allure of Idaho, and the growth and population that we see that continues to evolve and is a challenge that Fish and Game is monitoring and addressing, as well as any other industry or state and federal agency that has a nexus with the outdoors.
Perfect. All right, next slide, Ryan, please. All right, so this is just a picture, just to give you a visual of how much land of Idaho is designated wilderness. So we actually have the third highest amount of acres designated as wilderness acres in the US. And you can see in here, the blue is kind of federal land, but the orange essentially is that wilderness area. And so when you think about like central eastern Idaho, in Ryan's area, there's so much wilderness space there and just amazing ability to recreate. What factors do recreationists point out as being the most important for the quality of their experience here in Idaho, Ian?
People come and Idahoans live here for I think the same reason, and it's just to have these vast wild landscapes, to enjoy the clean water and fresh air, and have an experience with nature, and again, where our state has so much federal land, that is essentially locked in and preserved so that we have that access. So, we want to manage the experience for everybody, and at Fish and Game, our role is to conserve all of Idaho's wildlife, and manage that on behalf of the public. It is a public resource, and we manage that for them. And so, we want to make sure that those populations are healthy, that those habitats stay intact for their summer range and winter range. And that people have the opportunity to go out and experience these things and have great experiences and manage and ensure that those populations sustain into the future.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, next slide, Ryan. All right, closing up here real quick. So again, we've got these amazing, the map on your right is scenic byways. So we have state scenic byways, but we also have some national, and even the yellow on the top is an international Selkirk loop that goes up to BC and Eastern Washington and through Idaho. But we have, again, with all these access points, but I want to touch on Idaho Fish and Game access specifically on the bottom of this. So you guys manage 31 wildlife management areas around the state. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And how does it take? Okay, let's talk about what kind of opportunities you have there, and how does it affect the local economy and local employment within when people do participate in this recreation?
Yeah. So like we said, I mean, there's a huge tourism nexus, and our wildlife management areas are essentially built and created to conserve wildlife habitat. So what we found across the state is one of the threats is really the winter range. So for big game species like deer and elk. And so in the summer, the deer and elk are up in the timber, in the forests, and in the winter, they need to come down and have low elevation sagebrush steppe to be able to survive through the winter. And that also is great habitat for humans. And so what we've done is try to build these wildlife management areas as refuges for wildlife. But there's one up in your neck of the woods, our Grigg Mountain Wildlife Refuge. There's a fantastic trail that we've rehabilitated that allows people to take a 4-day hike and get out in nature, and experience these refuges and see the wildlife and enjoy those areas. So, we recognize there are so many communities, like we said, communities like Riggins and Orofino, which rely heavily on fishing, salmon and steelhead. A lot of these communities really, they have that shoulder season which is often hunting season. And so that's a way for people to come into their community, purchase gas, buy groceries, go to the restaurants, stay in the hotels, and really is a lifeblood to these communities. And that creates jobs, you know, in the hospitality industry and the service industry. But like we said, you know, the rafting in Idaho, there three of the top raft companies in the world are based here in Idaho, and one's up in your neck of the woods, NRS. We have Moravia and Air here in Boise. You know, there's two really, you know, First Light and Cryptek are hunting camouflage companies based here. There's Hide drift boats and Rio fishing lines over in East Idaho. So there's a whole manufacturing industry around firearms and ammunition in Idaho. And CCI Spear, which is part of the federal ammunition family, have their primary facilities based here in Idaho. So not only does it create jobs in the private sector, but you know, the public sector for agencies like Fish and Game, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Forest Service, the BLM, all of these agencies work collaboratively in the outdoors to create and manage this experience, preserve populations, maintain land, and so we are all part of that as well. And our Technical Services Bureau, one thing that people don't realize often about Fish and Game is, you know, we are there to be advocates for habitat and wildlife. And so when development projects go on, whether it be natural resource extraction or solar wind farms or just housing subdivisions, Fish and Game technical service staff will assess that area and really measure the impacts that development may have on wildlife and work to mitigate, so that the development folks can work to mitigate that and make sure that it's properly, you know, licensed through the federal government, and that we're just maintaining that experience and that wildlife for generations to come.
Nice. And then last question, I want you to kind of tell me about how the Idaho Endowment Partnership works. I've seen that 2/3 of hunters used public land at some point, at least in some of their hunting days. That's a lot. And so tell me a little bit about Idaho Endowment Partnership and how that creates opportunity.
Yeah. So Idaho State Lands Board has a charter that they are to manage those lands for the greatest economic benefit to benefit schools. And so with that, there's a large opportunity for them to generate revenue for schools off of that land. And it is state-owned land. But what we'd seen is that there were opportunities where that land was being closed to public access in certain instances. And so what we did a couple of years ago is we entered into an agreement where we would help lease that land for public access. And certainly it provides access to fishing and hunting and trapping, but really it's all outdoor recreation. That is the mission of that partnership. So we actually pay a nominal acreage fee to the Department of Lands so that we can keep that land open to Idahoans to access for the outdoors. And sorry to get off track, but that is similar with the wildlife management areas. It provides access and is open to the public, as well as one other program we have with large timber companies called our large tract lands, where we do a similar lease agreement with large timber companies across the state to ensure that private land is open and available to Idahoans.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, Ryan, next slide. All right, this should be my last slide, and then Ryan's going to take over. So Ian, the Fish and Game did a survey in 2023 of just how many people in Idaho recreate with hunting, fishing, or wildlife viewing. And this is just a summary of those results. So quite a few people hunt, fish, or wildlife view. And it seemed like almost 95% of people have fished in the past at some point, and almost 80% have viewed wildlife intentionally, like left their house to view wildlife. What I want to focus on is on the right side. And this was astounding to me that how close and local this opportunity is for Idahoans, because you don't have to travel far, like you said. You can sometimes travel 10 minutes and you are able to view some of the most magnificent wildlife in our area. just right in the backyard. And so I just wanted to point to that do you think that's unique to Idaho? Do you think that accessibility so close to home and statewide is something that really sets us apart?
It is. That access is unique to us and a few other Western states. And it's really cool because, I live here in Boise now. I grew up in Pocatello. But literally I don't even have to leave Pocatello or Boise to experience wildlife. We're based here right along the river. I can go fishing on my lunch break. We have deer walking through our MK Nature Center. And that's really true for all of Idaho. And what I think from a Department of Labor standpoint is important is that that is one of the big draws that companies use when trying to attract qualified and skilled workforce to the businesses, and that's why businesses are relocating to Idaho for that quality of life and that access to the outdoors. And you look at our universities. I mean, my dad was a city boy in San Francisco, went to Idaho State University, fell in love with the outdoors, and he stayed and became a very a great contributing member to our state. So, I think that uniqueness that we have in Idaho is a huge driver, not only for the enjoyment of people recreationally, but to our businesses that either want to grow here or bring great staff here and bring students in that can be educated here and then go to work and stay in Idaho as well.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Ryan, your turn. Thank you for
That
your
was
insight,
really
Ian. That was
interesting.
wonderful.
Thank you for the conversation. That does set the table very nicely for some of the statistical things that we're required to talk about. We're regional labor economists, and we have some data, of course, to share, and we'll get Ian's insights on some of these things too. So, of course, wildlife-related expenditures, and I'm not just talking about fish and game. Wildlife-related expenditures, it could be a lot of ancillary and other industries, but recreation expenditures in the state alone that overlap into that industry are $2.1 billion as of the fiscal year that was measured in 2022. So it is big business here. It represented 3% of the state's GDP. We'll take another look at that here in the next couple of years as the data becomes available. And it does have significant overlap, as I mentioned, into outdoor recreation. That Idaho GDP share has actually spiked 46% in the last 5 years for outdoor recreation. So outdoor recreation supporting activities has also meant a 38% boon to GDP for the state in the last 5 years as well. And people really want to get out there. It's apparent. And they want to enjoy what Idaho has to offer as far as that landscape and the wildlife-related recreation that we have here. Now, relative to how few workers are employed in hunting, angling, and the wildlife recreation occupations, they do support an industry with that exponential output relative to the amount of dollars that they generate. So that few workers generating $2.1 billion toward the state GDP is very substantial and significant. And that was one of the things that kind of led us to this topic and how important it is to the state's economy. The pie chart will kind of show how equipment, we mentioned equipment a little bit. Half of those expenditures are buying equipment in retailers, trip-related expenditures of accommodation and food service, and so on, impact this particular output. There's a lot of niche occupations within the industry as well. Like we mentioned guides and outfitters before. They account for about $600 million just in Idaho's economy in 2022 alone, contributing toward that GDP. And that industry is about 5,000 jobs. We were discussing this earlier, that there might be sole proprietorships too. They might not be employing a great amount of people. There might just be single business owners or family-owned companies that are doing these guides and outfitters types of operations. But we can see that wildlife recreation and tourism activity is obviously important to keeping money within businesses and also residents with the tax revenue that it generates as well. Ian, what are some of your go-to reports for the data that represents the economic value of Idaho wildlife-related recreation?
There's a couple. One, it was really nice. I think it was like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. The Bureau of Labor Statistics actually created outdoor recreation as an identified industry. So that was really nice to be able to understand and start quantifying in a more meaningful sense what the impact of outdoor recreation is, not only to the U.S., but also to Idaho. So that is fantastic. Prior to that, the Outdoor Industry Association did a good job of capturing some of that information. And then every 10 years, along with the census, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife comes out with a report that measures the economic impact of hunting, fishing, and wildlife viewing. And so that's nice for us because we know often we have a lot of the data that tells us how many hunters and anglers we have in Idaho and how many are residents and non-residents and what age breakdown they have. But one hard thing to capture is the wildlife viewing. And so that report has been fantastic for us to know that our impact to the Idaho extends beyond these activities that we manage and impacts really all Idahoans who love the outdoors and wildlife. And then there's a number of kind of industry-specific reports. The Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation does reports each year nationally within Idaho for fishing and boating activities. Obviously, Parks and Rec has a report that they came out with that captures the camping and boating as well. And industry groups like the National Shooting Sports Foundation helps quantify, not only hunting, but shooting sports. And that's really been a growing industry is people who just want to recreationally target shoot, clay pigeons. And that's super important to us from an economic standpoint, not only for the participation, but Idaho Fish and Game doesn't receive any state tax funds. We're primarily funded through the sale of our licenses, tags, and permits. But then we also receive federal excise tax money federally from manufacturers that produce hunting and fishing equipment and boat fuel. And so, when people purchase ammunition to go target shooting, that money gets distributed to the states and goes toward conservation. So that's really fantastic. And then, there's a couple other surveys. One is called America's Wildlife Values. And that's just interesting from it's not necessarily a employment tracking, but it helps us understand how people are perceiving and viewing wildlife and the level of importance it has in their lives.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Ian, in your revenue sources and kind of what keeps Fish and Game operating to help perpetuate this lifestyle and this industry and these occupations. This kind of segues into the total hunting and fishing license revenue that you alluded to earlier in kind of some of those cash streams, those cash flow streams that come in. This is charting paid licenses, tags, permits, and stamps in the last 21 years. And apparently in the last few years, the gross hunting license revenue, and both combined with fishing license revenue, has skyrocketed. Can you kind of share with us why the dramatic uptick in revenue and even maybe popularity, if that's even related to this in the last 4 years, as we can see on this chart?
Oh, I would love to. Thank you. So as I mentioned, Fish and Game, our primary revenue driver is the sale of hunting and fishing licenses. And, one great thing about Idaho is we like to keep, taxes low and prices low. And as a state agency at Fish and Game, we feel the same. And so over the years, we have not really had many price increases. But as, inflation and time goes on, things get more expensive. And back in 2020, we actually instituted a price increase for non-residents. So while the revenue is going up, we have a fixed number of deer and elk tags that we sell to non-residents each year. And that number has been steady for over 20 years. And so this revenue increase is largely due to the increase that we put on our non-resident tags and licenses. So, as the population of Idaho grows, you would expect to see more people participating in hunting and fishing and outdoor recreation, which is one of the drivers of the population growth. And really over the last 20 years, we've seen pretty steady numbers. It's a very slight increase. But overall, we've been holding steady, and we used to have approximately 23% of the state adults actually held a hunting or fishing license. That number now is closer to 19% of Idahoans hold a hunting or fishing license. So these are very popular activities. When you think 1 in 5 Idahoans participate in hunting or fishing, that's quite a few. And that represents about 370,000 residents. We have about 235,000 non-residents who come to Idaho and fish each year. And of that 235,000, there's about 150,000 people that are just purchasing daily fishing licenses. So, it's been helpful for us. We're in a very healthy spot revenue-wise. And like I said, that is simply to manage and conserve the wildlife for the citizens of Idaho. And so we've been fortunate that the legislature allowed us to do that price increase and maintain a stable revenue source for future of wildlife conservation.
Yeah, thank you. And that definitely there's a tourism tie-in with there, which I find very interesting. Despite maybe the cost of fishing or hunting licenses going up, the tourism and the interest in it hasn't waned at all. That's some really good insight there, Ian. So let's look at this. In 2021, on this time series here, you can see the kind of where the peak was in combo fishing and hunting licenses sold. And incidentally, that year of 2021, Idaho led the country in population growth. So there was a correlation there. And then also, as we look at growth projections and population into the future, within the next 5 years, there's going to be a 5.5% projected population growth for Idaho. And it was a recent influx of people moving here, apparently, as we've all heard about with that population change. And the draw really is for a lot of people that rural aspect, that outdoor aspect, the freedom that kind of we enjoy here in Idaho based on the wide open landscape. So there's an ever-growing ratio of game hunting and angling enthusiasts, which is pretty apparent here. Ian, my question for you, based on kind of this data, is how does Idaho Fish and Game plan for that crowding or population growth? I guess you could call it crowding. There's some studies there. How does Idaho Fish and Game account for that?
Yeah. We have we're going on our 4th year study with the University of Idaho on a crowding survey related to deer and elk hunters. And so, it's one thing we've heard a lot over the years, and we certainly experienced it. You can see that spike in 2020 is that there were more people in the outdoors. And so we're actively monitoring people's happiness with their experience in the outdoors. And again, we manage these activities for the public, and there are a number of levers we could pull. If residents ever said, "Hey, you know what? I'd like less crowding," there's levers we can pull as far as season structure and timing of hunts and availability of hunts that we could help manage that. So right now we're more in a monitoring stage. Over the last couple of years, and really why my position existed, is a number of states across the U.S., because their funding was so highly weighted toward license and revenue of hunting and fishing licenses, a number of states outside of Western states were seeing a dramatic drop in the number of hunters and anglers. And there were people that were either aging out of the activity and not bringing in the next generation. And so they were really having a hard time meeting the financial demands of conserving wildlife. And that was a worry for a couple of years in Idaho, is like, could we experience that as well? And I would say on that, we're just still in the monitoring. It doesn't seem to be the case in Idaho. Every year there are people who, age out, I guess you could say, of hunting and fishing, and there's a steady flow of new participants. So again, from a percentage basis, maybe fewer people on a population percentage are hunting and fishing. And if there ever becomes conflict or the public says this is not the experience or how we want it, we can certainly find ways to address that.
All right. Thank you for that insight also. We'll pivot here a little bit and talk about the related jobs and in-demand occupations. For a lot of those jobs being STEM occupations, which there's obviously a future of STEM jobs, both nationally and in Idaho. For fish and wildlife related jobs, it's projected to grow by about 500 jobs by the beginning of next decade. That's about a 10% hike in STEM related jobs. As you can see here, those are kind of the ones listed, a lot of scientific type of STEM occupations. And then if we look over here at some of the occupation densities or concentrations for Idaho, this one's an interesting slide. I wanted to credit Lisa with some of the research and the visuals here on this one. If you look at the table on the left, those are STEM occupations. They're biologist type jobs. There's 3 times more biologist type jobs as far as relative to the nation here in Idaho. And you can see how the other states stack up as well. But there is a demand for these types of jobs for supporting fish and game here in the state. Idaho's median wage ranks 17th for zoologists and biologists relative to the rest of the nation. And then if you look at fish and game wardens over on that side, that relates to Idaho Fish and Game, obviously. The employment concentration is nearly 3 times what it is relative to the nation, also with game wardens. So that one's an interesting one, 15th highest median wage in the nation. So keeping it very competitive as well. Now, if you're looking at soil and plant scientists, Idaho ranks sixth in employment concentration relative to the nation, and hydrologists, we rank 4th in the amount of jobs that there are as hydrologists. So those are interesting findings. 4% of the wage and salary employment comes from these types of STEM jobs and fish and game related jobs that we're focusing on. And if you look at tour and travel guides, this was a very interesting one. Nationally, we rank 21st in employment concentration of the amount of tour and travel guide type jobs, but we are highest in median wages for travel guides, tour guides in the nation. So I thought that was interesting. Lisa did as well. And then outdoor recreation also accounts for 35,000 jobs just in outdoor recreation. So that isn't necessarily all fish and game related, but outdoor recreation as a whole is very popular. And there's a need for it, as we've articulated earlier here in the state, to meet that demand. Ian, how are some of the adjacent industries listed here impacting fishing, wildlife, and outdoor recreation type activities? What have you seen as far as how some of the tangential industries or adjacent industries as relating to fish and wildlife from a demand perspective when fish and wildlife, fish and game looks at that?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say one really great thing I love about working at Fish and Game is I'm one of the few non-biologists working in our communication bureau. But really, if you want to work in wildlife conservation and management, the tip of the spear is really working at a state agency. And so the staff we have at our department are literally at the top of their field. I mean, we've pioneered new techniques. When you talk about, we have PhD geneticists that work with us, and the Lonesome Larry story is part of that. in addition to a lot of other genetic work that we do. But we have literally the people in the top of their field working at Fish and Game. And really, to put your foot in the door, you have to have a master's degree, if not a PhD. And so, with that, you certainly have jobs here at Fish and Game. We have about 550 full-time employees across the state. But you look at all of the land managers, fishing, Forest Service, BLM. There's a lot of biologist jobs across all of those as well. But there's a whole private sector industry as well. You look at companies like Biomark here in Boise, and stream restoration biologists, the Trout Unlimited folks that work across on different projects. It really is, there's a lot of jobs out there. And then the whole outdoor recreation industry, we've talked about some of those companies as well. And I think largely some of that stuff gets undercounted, potentially as manufacturing jobs, because there's a lot of RV manufacturers in the state. And those are outdoor recreation jobs, but are likely classified, I would think, as manufacturing. And same with the ammunition, and probably more. I mean, there's so much, I can't even wrap my own head around how many jobs touch outdoor recreation in this state. And certainly ones that have a direct effect are going to be like the outfitters and guides. And we know that anything we do at Fish and Game directly impacts that industry as a whole. And we work very closely with the Outfitters and Guides Association to ensure that if changes are coming, that we maintain and keep them whole and maintain those industries for them and don't negatively impact that industry.
And thank you for that. This is where some of the jobs are located. You can see those darker purple concentrations of the counties of where the jobs are. A lot of it is where the population is. But then when you look at Butte County in the east central area, there on the right, that darker purple there, that's kind of interesting. And then you have Kootenai counties, Kootenai and the other counties up there in northern Idaho represented as well. And then, of course, Ada County there. If you look at it regionally, a fourth of the jobs are located, of course, where the populous areas of southwestern Idaho are. But then if you look, another almost quarter, are in northern Idaho, where there's not such a large population representation. So that's kind of the irony there, is a lot of those jobs are in the northern panhandle, but then again, there's not a high enough population relative to the jobs that are there. Eastern Idaho, about 1 in 5 jobs is a regional concentration of angling, hunting related jobs. And then you see how the other parts of the state shake out there with their representation of these jobs and employment in hunting, angling, and recreation.
And I just want to interject here real quick. So the most fascinating thing for me is that Southwestern makes up almost half of the state's employment by itself.
Right.
And so this is really an area where the Southwest does not dominate as much as it does in other industries, but it's much more statewide and spread out. If you take Eastern, Southeastern, South Central together, you can see they make up about 45%, almost half. And they only account for about a third of total state employment on the whole. So even though Southwestern still looks like a powerhouse down here, it's definitely more spread out throughout the state than our total occupation is in general.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll turn to this one here. This is where the wildlife recreation industries by region are represented. And we kind of touched on this in the beginning of what is being manufactured, what is being sold, and where these industries are located by region. Pretty consistent with what we discussed earlier, and kind of an interesting slide there. And by the way, we'll publish these slides afterwards with a copy of the webinar link for you. But this is something that's really interesting. Where are these industries located? And finally, we'll look at one more item here before we take questions. Ian, we discussed this a little bit during our preparation. some of the challenges and some of the things that the Fish and Game is focusing on with regards to sustainability on some of the X factors in what will affect the industry and what will affect the viability, and some things that may be within our control, some may not be. Can you please elaborate on some of these both strengths and challenges that Fish and Game is focusing on here in Idaho?
Yeah, these are what you see on these slides are just a couple of the kind of key external factors that we're monitoring and managing. So we've talked a little bit about the population increase. With that, obviously the crowding of the experience for users, but also just the development and habitat fragmentation that comes along with that. Obviously, we have there's some very high profile, energy development things going on. And so that certainly has a nexus to wildlife. We've a lot of these things really are habitat related. But I guess I can just talk about the habitat. So, land development, making sure that we're conserving wildlife, keeping those habitats intact and places for these animals to live. And that's going to be exponentially harder as the population goes and as resource needs increase. Weather and climate is certainly one. Wildfire, it has a huge impact on wildlife habitat. So as the temperatures increase, it becomes more prone to wildfire. And with wildfire, often invasive species, invasive grasses and shrubs can overpopulate and we lose that habitat. But also hard winters. I mean, in eastern Idaho, as you guys know, 2 winters ago, we had elk and deer populations just decimated by the winter. And so we're, managing the availability of hunting there to rebuild those populations. And with the hot weather, there's diseases that can proliferate as well. We have a disease up north, Lisa, you may have heard of it, our EHD. So when we get really hot weather, it allows a certain type of fly to proliferate and infects deer, and they get EHD, also known as like blue tongue. Also on the wildlife disease front, a couple of years ago, we found our first case of chronic wasting disease in Idaho. And so that can have a large impact on the tourism and the outfitting industries, as well as just the in-state tourism for people hunting. So we're actively managing and monitoring for that. And then another high profile thing we saw that not only impacts fish and wildlife, but also the economy, farming, infrastructure, and agriculture is the quagga mussels that were detected on the Snake River. And so, there's a lot of things going on, over the 125 years that Fish and Game has been in existence. Our charge has largely been the same, but the challenges change. And so, we just stand ready to meet those challenges and address them and find solutions as best we can.
Well, thank you so much. Those are the expert insights that we invited Ian on for, and we really enjoyed having us kind of take a look at and be enlightened on some of these things as we've done a little bit of research, and then to kind of steer us to what Fish and Game's role is with all of this, both with the labor market, with the economy, and with the various forms of recreation that we all enjoy. I think that's kind of the big draw. Why do we live in Idaho? And these are some major and crucial points that we talk about. So we really appreciate your expertise on this. And I think we have some time for some questions if we want to put it over to Craig for some field questions from the audience.
Well, I was going to say we didn't have any questions yet, but someone just posted in a paragraph of a question. So it'll take me a second to read that. So I'll do the second one first. What is the plan to fight and keep the recreational areas clean of trash and such from the higher uses? Our population is growing, and just how is the increased use, and it's kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, abuse perhaps, is being mitigated from the fishing game standpoint.
Yeah. This is a shared challenge between not only does this impact Fish and Game, but the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service and just even our county. We manage about 500 fishing and boating access sites, and we have issues with trash. We have issues with vandalism. And really what we try to do, we've done a couple things like on our vault toilets, we've brought in school children across the state to paint these beautiful, beautiful murals. And they're just fantastic. And so, we hope to discourage vandalism by creating art. And really, it's just a public information campaign. We discourage and try to educate people not only on trash, but responsible, fireworks, responsible fire, responsible, just conflicts with wildlife, bear awareness. If you're in grizzly bear or black bear country, to do the things that you need to do to manage conflicts. And, largely, I think the people that are doing this are not going to, if we did a public information campaign, it may not impact them. But our hope is to just kind of raise the awareness for all Idahoans, to create that social pressure and appreciation for what we have, because it does cost a significant amount of money and time to address issues when they come up. And we do our best, but we can't solve it all. Again, there are some things we're doing with the crowding that we try to manage, and really it just comes down to what makes Idaho great is us being so friendly and neighborly, and being a good neighbor, and realizing that if you're a rafter, there may be somebody fishing, that you can enjoy your experience and try not to negatively impact somebody else's experience.
Thank you. Our first question is, are there other resources that either labor or the Idaho Fish and Game have looked at in terms of differences between wildlife and non-wildlife dependent outdoor recreation? And if not, they're making the point that it would be helpful to understand what types of outdoor recreation are driving the economic impact, industry growth, tourism, et cetera. I don't know, Ian, if you want to take a stab at that, or Ryan after Ian.
I'm sorry, I was just trying to look for that.
First question there. Sorry, we might want to address that in the email later, because I'm kind of getting short on time. But it's basically, I think there's a question like what labor, what resources are specific for wildlife, and then non-wildlife dependent. So they're basically asking if there's a separation between the impact of employment and labor. And I'll just say, I don't think so. It's really hard to kind of get at that. It would require probably a research study that we'd have to find. A lot of times, especially with employment in Idaho, there's a blurring, there's a gray where you have industries that are kind of contributing to a cluster of that, recreation and tourism, those types of things. There's many different occupations fueling that, while some are focusing on that. And I think that's what we're trying to get at, is just which ones are solely for those. But they'll be kind of hard to get to, I think, for that one. But we might want to address that question later. The last question we have, and then I think we'll wrap it up. My time's a little off, so I think we're actually at the noon hour. But it'd be good to know, the question is, it'd be good to know how much more a fishing game license cost for non-residents with that change you had mentioned earlier as the price went up.
Yeah. So as a resident, you can fish for the year, as just a normal adult license is about $30. And so, for less than the cost that it probably takes to go to the movies, you can go fishing every single day in Idaho. And a hunting license for residents is about $20. But on the non-resident side, you're approaching $600 for a hunting license. So it is significantly more if you want an annual license to hunt in Idaho. A daily fishing license, I think, is about $17 now, and you can add on additional days if you'd like. But what's interesting, that 80-20 rule, Right now, non-residents make up less than 20% of our hunters, but actually provide over 80% of the hunting revenue to our state. So again, from a funding conservation standpoint, those non-residents play an important role in wildlife conservation in Idaho.
Right. Thank you, Ian. I think that kind of concludes our webinar with you today. I just want to thank you again and for coming on and spending an hour with us. This has been great information. Any final thought you'd like to give before we leave the webinar?
No, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining in and the questions and being able to share this information from Fish and Game and kind of to that question we had a hard time answering. There is just, you know, preserving wildlife and preserving healthy habitats in Idaho has so many touch points that it's hard to quantify them all. But it is important, and it's important to not only our economy, but our quality of life. And I appreciate everybody for listening in today.